Thank you all for coming over to this session, and I hope that we can learn some things together and talk a little bit about some of the changes related to how patients will get diagnosed for sleep apnea and some of the new therapies for sleep apnea that are on the horizon. All right, let me jump into the presentation here. So I'm the Vice President of Sleep at Apria Healthcare. I also have a podcast. And by the way, if we're not connected on LinkedIn, feel free to use your phone, scan the thing. I like to share a lot of articles and research that are available as it relates to sleep. So let's connect. And also, if you have not heard the Sleep Tech Talk podcast, I would encourage you. It's just sort of by happenstance that you have all three of the podcast hosts as your presenters this afternoon. So myself, Jerry George, and then we have Emerson Kerr a little bit later this afternoon. All right, some evolution of sleep diagnostics and OSA therapy. So this is just an agenda of what we're going to cover, over the next few minutes as it relates to, historic methods of diagnosing and treating patients for sleep apnea, and then some of the things that are on the horizon. And by the way, anybody adverse to technology, love old school, don't want to see any, this might not be the presentation for you, because there are some things that are out there, but remember, 80% of patients remain undiagnosed and untreated, and we've still got a lot of work to do. But, so we know the existing sort of traditional means of getting patients through the diagnostic channel. Does anyone have a backlog at your sleep lab today? Yeah, I think that's the case for most sleep providers out there. And if it's not a matter of equipment in a lot of cases, it certainly could be that it is because you just don't have enough sleep techs, right? So these new generation technologies are things that are just, I think they're going to help us to be able to reach more patients, to be able to help patients become more adherent to therapy. And with the use of AI, and at the very end of my presentation, I talk about two different types of technologies that Emerson will actually expand on in his presentation. So it's always good when him and I present together, because he gets to sort of go into more detail about some things relative to AI. All right, home sleep apnea testing. So, these are two of the traditional home sleep testing devices that were on the market. The ApneaLink Air device was a gold standard for a long time, and then of course Philips came along with their product. But those technologies, you could consider them to be, in some cases old school, or even obsolete if the manufacturer is not making it any longer. So let's talk about the new school technologies that are out there, and see if anyone has seen some of these things, and maybe whether you're actually using them in your facility. We've got the sleep image ring. This actually particular device is used by a couple of different diagnostic companies, but it's a new home sleep testing device. There's also the Night Owl, which sort of started this whole trend of the use of PPG technology. We'll talk a little bit more about that in just a few minutes. One of the latest home sleep testing devices that's out there is this device from a company called Huxley Medical, and it's called Sansa. What's interesting about this particular device is that it actually is a full home sleep testing device, but the patient wears it on their chest. And it is you also get a true EKG lead in addition to the other channels that you would typically get with a home sleep testing device. And then Compumedics has come out with their home sleep testing device as well. So, a few less wires, and certainly in some cases even disposable products are available now to help patients get through the diagnostic channel. Peripheral arterial tone. So what company has this technology? Oh, WatchPat. WatchPat uses peripheral arterial tone. It is their proprietary algorithm. What we know today too is that payers will pay for this particular type of test for patients to get diagnosed for sleep apnea. So, and you can see that peripheral arterial tone measures arterial pulse volume changes in the finger as a result of vasomotion, or vasoconstriction and vasodilation. One of the things, if you have any takeaway from what we talk about today, in addition to some of the new OSA therapies, I really want you to do some research on PAT technology, and then also this, photoplethysmography, or PPG. So all of the newer technologies that are out there that are ring-based, or that don't necessarily have any way to measure flow at the patient's nose and mouth, is probably going to be using PPG. How many people have heard of PPG? All right. I spoke at a conference a few weeks ago, and I asked that question, and there were 150 people in the room, and not one person had heard of PPG. And they certainly didn't understand how it works in order to be able to, how do you take an oximeter and turn just a single channel into a multi-channel sleep test? All right. So one of the things that I absolutely wanted you to be able to see is that it is a sophisticated process in as much as it is signal processing to be able to come up with the data that's derived from a PPG device. And because we have a lot to cover, I won't get into detail with this, but like I said, the primary thing I wanted you to take away from this part of the presentation, because I think it, from a technologist standpoint, it's important for us, just like we understand, EEG signals and frequency and all of the things that make up those particular types of signals that we receive from patient data. We need to understand this data, because this is what is built into some of the consumer devices that we'll talk about in just a minute. There's also cardiopulmonary coupling. If you look at Sleep Image, and it is the one new home sleep testing device that I would absolutely tell you to go to their website. They have a lot of information as it relates to cardiopulmonary coupling. And you can see it's by analyzing the interaction between the heart rate variability and respiratory tidal volume fluctuations is how they're able to get their signals. So again, it's a single channel and deriving multiple layers of information in order to be able to diagnose a patient. Is anyone using any of the devices that I had up on the screen? WatchPat? Okay. So some of the disruptors that are out there. Has anyone seen that the Apple Watch is FDA approved for sleep apnea screening? No? All right. Well, if you haven't, they made that announcement recently, and it was actually just about 2 weeks ago that feature went live on an Apple Watch. And I initially thought that it was probably going to be for the absolute latest version of the Apple Watch, but I found out it's actually several generations of the Apple Watch have that new technology built into it. So it actually will produce an alert to the patient to let them know if they wear their watch, they have sleep apnea events, they wake up in the morning, they're going to get an alert, just like that your watch tells you to stand up, or you haven't closed your rings for the day. It's going to give that patient a notification that they may have sleep apnea and need to be evaluated. So great screening tool. However, I'll get to that in just a second. The other thing I would tell you is that what's interesting is that the Samsung watch was actually already FDA approved earlier this year, but there's just, from a market standpoint, Apple Watches have so much more market share in that watch technology space that Apple Watch got a lot more press, I would say, about sleep apnea detection versus the Samsung device. But both watches have that technology built into them today. But is there the possibility at some point in the future that a consumer-grade sleep technology device could replace a healthcare-grade diagnostic test? We'll talk about that in a minute. So, can we bring the sleep center to the home? If you are paying attention to the world of sleep technology today, things are getting smaller, they're getting disposable, and there are multiple companies now that have the capability to be able to do level 2 testing in a patient's home. So it's full PSG. It is transferred remotely, through either the patient's phone, an app, or whatever the connection point might be. But it would give you the ability to have a comprehensive study on that patient done in the home. But what's the one barrier that we have today that keeps us from implementing level 2 testing on a wide scale? Nobody's paying for it. Anybody recognize the house, by the way? No? It was actually in the movie Scream. All right. So if you go to, has anybody done this? You go to Amazon and you put in home sleep test. Well, if I'm an uneducated patient related to sleep care and sleep diagnostics, I could easily make some assumptions that I could go here and get a sleep test. I don't need to go to the hospital and get a $900 home sleep test billed to my insurance. But, you know, most of these, I would say in general, you know, there may be some diagnostic information that could be useful, but it's not necessarily, I don't know of any of these that necessarily qualify today for a home sleep apnea test that a payer would cover. But let's talk about the future. You know, some of the other things from a diagnosis standpoint are also on the horizon. We saw our InsoData friends, they're in the vendor hall in there. You know, they have a great product as it relates to AI and doing patient scoring or scoring of sleep testing. And I don't know if you saw this, but recently they had an acquisition where they acquired a company called Resonea. Resonea has actually been around for a few years, and Resonea has a product. It is an app called Drowsel. It uses sound waves and is able to detect sound waves that can pick up respiration. And by using the sound waves and picking up respiration, they're able to detect whether a patient has sleep apnea or not through that particular app. I have to tell you, I had an opportunity to trial the Drowsel app myself, and at the time I was wearing CPAP, so I thought, you know, let's see if the sound technology will work if I'm wearing a CPAP, which is creating its own sort of, you know, I guess white noise, and see if it's able to detect, you know, what my AHI might be during that particular night that I ran the app. The next morning, I turned off the app and let it do its processing, and when it came up with the AHI, it 100% matched the AHI that my download had from my CPAP machine. It was extremely accurate. So now you've taken, and has anyone heard of the InsoData also has a product called InsoTST. It is where they're able to take a PPG signal that we talked about earlier and process that PPG signal and get sleep data. So, you know, now you have sleep data that's able to be derived from oximetry, and you also have now this sound, I guess, diagnostic that they, you know, could potentially incorporate into, you know, some type of diagnostic testing at some point in the future. Kind of interesting, sort of scary. Don't forget, 80% remain undiagnosed and untreated. And I don't want anyone to leave here and go, oh, InsoData is the devil. You know, I think they're just a company that just happens to be at the center of technology. And you know, ultimately where things are today is that there are no payers who are covering, you know, any of those types of you know, sound-initiated diagnosis processes and that sort of thing. Anybody have any questions so far? All right. Biomarkers for OSA. So there have been research studies done on this, and again, I think that this is another thing that you should go away from here and do a little more research on it. But did you know that there is the potential at some point in the future that, let's say that you are a potential newly diagnosed or about to be diagnosed diabetic patient. So when you go to get blood work done in order to become diagnosed for sleep apnea, imagine if you were to add one more panel to that blood test, and it would tell the physician, the provider, that patient has sleep apnea. Because there are absolute correlations from a biomarker standpoint between a patient who has diabetes and who has obstructive sleep apnea that can be detected through you know, the different blood tests that are available today. And what's interesting to me is that in these blood tests and the clinical studies that have been done related to biomarkers, Dr. Dennis Wang, who's with Kaiser Permanente, I mean, these are you know, icons in the world of sleep medicine. Dr. Richard Bogan, who's out of South Carolina, who's you know, been around for a very long time and well-respected physician. So, you know, even doctors who have been traditional large sleep programs, are looking at these alternative methods of being able to get a patient diagnosed from a sleep apnea perspective. All right. So why do we need these alternative diagnostic channels? My experience is, and I would say for the most part, it is that a hospital-based sleep program tends to be a little bit more backlogged, I would say, in some cases than some of the private facilities. But one hospital system that I spoke to recently, it was 12 weeks for a patient to get a home sleep test once it had been ordered. 12 weeks. For something that is a fairly simple test for a patient to do in the home, and to get into the lab, it was months for a patient to get into the sleep lab. So, it is a matter of there is technology that's available. There's pent-up demand. One of the things that I think that Inspire Medical has done for us as a field and industry is just to raise awareness related to sleep apnea, because everybody's seen an Inspire commercial, right? And so I think it gets more patients talking. And at one point in my conversations with some of the Inspire folks, they made mention that they get about 45,000 people per month that go to their website and fill out the form to be contacted about sleep apnea. So there certainly is demand out there for people who want to seek treatment who may not necessarily want a CPAP machine, especially when they're selling against it with the Inspire. But so the good news is that they've created a lot of awareness, but it's difficult sometimes. I think patients don't understand the journey that they're about to go on to get to Inspire if that's what they truly want for their therapy. So one of the things I thought that I would mention is that, there's companies out there that do provide outsourcing services. So if you're a hospital-based, how many hospital-based sleep programs do we have in the room? Oh, fantastic. One of the things to consider is, I know you probably have your own home sleep testing programs, right? And so you have your equipment, you deploy it. But what if and in particular, if you have a significant backlog, or if a patient can't get a home sleep test the same week that it's ordered, maybe consider doing some outsourcing so that you expand the geographic coverage of your sleep lab. I don't think that, because there are some other things that we could talk about. Last year, when I presented at this particular conference, I talked about inpatient sleep apnea screening. And some of the programs that I've been involved with myself over the years where there is proactive inpatient screening that produces significant patients who need to be tested for sleep. And does anyone have an inpatient sleep screening program? There you go. So if you have a backlog, you don't currently outsource, I would recommend you at least look into it. Again, it could change the geographic reach of your program, and it might free up the capacity for you to be able to do some really creative things related to, implement a sleep apnea screening program in your hospital. And what I promise you that you'll find is that 25% of the patients who are within the four walls of the hospital are undiagnosed and untreated. So if you're at a 1,000-bed hospital, you have a lot of people who need sleep testing. So that's it on the diagnostic side. So we'll spend just a few minutes talking about some of the new, the traditional sleep therapy methods that are out there, and then some of the things that are on the horizon. I think that where the information that we've covered so far, you could certainly make the case that hey, wait a minute, this is going to be disruptive to us as a field from a diagnosis perspective, but I promise you there's more potential disruption on the therapy side than there is on the diagnostic side. So this is what we know today. With the absence of Philips, there's really only 3 PAP manufacturers that are commercially available in the U.S. today. Obviously, we have ResMed, we have React Health, and then there is another provider called ResVent that has a CPAP device as well. Now, there is some good news as it relates to CPAP therapy as we know it today. It is my understanding that there are 7 manufacturers who have devices in to be FDA approved right now. So, sometime when the FDA decides that they don't want anybody to make CPAPs except for ResMed and React Health, they will allow some of these devices to enter the market. And it is interesting because there are some truly unique things about these particular CPAP devices that are very different than the current models that are available. In fact, this CFAM, the black one right here on the screen, that one has no foam in the device. But from a sound standpoint, it's supposed to be exactly the same as what you would expect from ResMed from a sound standpoint. So they're trying to overcome some of the hurdles, I think, from an FDA approval standpoint that they may not have, they didn't want the challenge of trying to put sound insulation inside of the device and creating a roadblock for them to get into the U.S. There's also, I think probably one of the other ones that is probably the furthest along is this company right here in the middle. It's a manufacturer called UL out of China. What does that machine look like? It looks like an AirSense 11. So if they can somehow not get sued into oblivion by ResMed, I think that we would see, yeah, it really is. It's amazing how similar it is. And I would say one of the things that you need to know about UL right now is that they already have masks available in the U.S. You can either get them through UL, or there's another company called Rain 8 that is selling those CPAP masks, and they're good masks. All right, so let's talk about some of the other technologies that are on the horizon from a PAP perspective. I think that, and actually I hope that this time next year, if you have me and my co-host back to speak again, that we can really dive into some of these new therapies that are being developed for CPAP therapy. I think CPAP will be a very different thing in the future than it is today. And so again, take all of this, make notes, and then do your own homework, as much as you can find out about it. Vortex PAP, there is an episode of Sleep Tech Talk where we met with the lead researcher at the University of Cincinnati, and they are developing Vortex PAP, is what it's called. So it's interesting. This is a vortex signal, so this has nothing to do with the actual CPAP itself, but I wanted you to see sort of how the therapy is delivered. It is these pulses of air versus a continuous stream of air to keep a patient's airway open. And what's really truly unique about this particular type of therapy is that there's no seal that is necessary in order to deliver this vortex PAP to a patient and still keep their airway open. Kind of interesting, right? So you don't have the issue of pressure sores potentially from the mask. You don't have to worry so much about seal, because it's not about seal as much as it is about just delivering the right amount of pressure to the patient. And they claim that it can deliver a lower overall pressure and still keep a patient's airway open. All right, so that's vortex PAP. Has anybody heard of KPAP therapy? Yeah. The one thing that I can tell you is that you have to go into any session of learning about KPAP therapy with an open mind, and particularly if you are a respiratory therapist, because it will, the way that the pressure is delivered goes against everything that you were ever taught from a pressure delivery standpoint in the past. So, it is, for the first time, a radically new pressure algorithm demonstrates improved patient comfort by delivering the optimal inspiratory and expiratory pressures at the right time. That's what, and I think KPAP stands for Kairos PAP, by the way. Kairos at the just on time or at the right time, I think is what that stands for. So if you think about, how pressure is delivered today from an inspiratory and expiratory standpoint, KPAP is exactly the opposite. I've had an opportunity to breathe on it, and it's interesting. If you're on let's say you're on a CPAP with no expiratory pressure relief activated, the pressure, if you're at 15, it makes it difficult. You probably can't even talk to someone if you're wearing the CPAP and it's turned on, right? At 15 with KPAP, you can have a normal conversation with someone. It is pretty incredible. So I think from an adherence standpoint, it's going to be a game changer. And as I understand it currently, there's at least a couple of different manufacturers that would have the KPAP algorithm in their CPAP devices when it's launched. And it's supposed to, even on their LinkedIn page, they keep posting articles that, it's coming in 2025. So I know that they've been through some different clinical trials, and it's it's not quite fully FDA approved yet, but I think once they get it, you'll see KPAP start to really make a difference in the marketplace. So CPAP seems to potentially in the future be getting replaced by something that patients can tolerate more, that, from a pressure standpoint, because it doesn't have to deliver, the patient's tolerance of the pressure that it delivers is much better than standard CPAP. There's also not the issues, I think, from a mask standpoint that you typically get with the high pressures. And then even more importantly, and I think that that's where some of the presentations that they've been doing recently, the company that manufactures this, by the way, is called SleepRes. So if you're making notes, it's SleepRes. Yeah.
Is this fully auto, or is it
It would be an auto algorithm, I would assume, but they are working on a lab titration system. So you'll have the option to do both. Titrate it in the lab or to use it as an auto.
You think they're going to cheat?
Well, the fact that they're putting the effort into creating a lab titration unit where you can't even get one from some of the manufacturers right now tells me that they do genuinely care about sleep labs. We have a skeptic. So there's two other algorithms that I wanted to make you aware of too. This is a company based out of Canada called Novarest. They have a new algorithm that uses AI from a predictability standpoint to be able to adjust pressure differently than some of the current algorithms. I don't know the specifics, and there's not a lot of detail out about this right now. It's not commercially available in the US yet. But I think what's interesting is that one of the leadership folks at Novarest is a former ResMed executive. And so he's been around the industry, and when he left ResMed, this was the company that he became a part of. So, it tells me that there are definitely some sophisticated minds that are working on this particular algorithm. All right, there's another company. I've had an opportunity to meet with the developers of this particular algorithm, I guess you would say. It's a company, they don't even really have a name yet. The CEO of the company is this young guy who's incredibly intelligent, but he just has Stealth listed as the company's name for now, because I don't think that they've gotten it far enough along that they've developed the actual branding. But you can see that their approach centers around the idea that when a person, this is all around work of breathing. So they're going to have a work of breathing algorithm which is going to be a little different. Typically it's volume or it's flow related. These guys think that they can use a work of breathing algorithm that might be a better option for patients in the future. Interesting, right? I think the thing that I like the most about this is that, people are trying to figure out better ways to help patients stay on a therapy that can be life-changing for them. And, we just can't stick with, CPAP's always worked, and we know that, but what we also know is that, a couple of years after the patients start, that 50% of the patients potentially are no longer using their CPAP therapy. So that's a problem that needs to get corrected. All right, some of the alternative therapies. I talked about Inspire earlier. We all know about Inspire. We know that it can be an invasive procedure. If you're not a part of it today, I would recommend you join it, because I think it's interesting to see the patient's perspective on the Inspire surgery. And I'm not being negative about Inspire at all, but because there are patients on there that they have stories that are incredible as it relates to the success of their Inspire therapy. But there are also patients who've had, different side effects and things that are not necessarily positive, so you get to see both sides of it. So on Facebook, there's a group for Inspire patients that you ought to join and become a part of. There's also a procedure. It's the airlift procedure. It's a hyoid suspension procedure. I think the sort of super simple way to think about this is it's sort of a built-in oral appliance. If you have a patient who has significant sort of deficiency from a mandible standpoint, this is going to be able to help support the mandible, pull the jaw forward, and keep the airway open during the nighttime. Does it work? I have no idea. Custom oral appliance therapy. I'm telling you, for me personally, I really, because I have been able to make the change myself from wearing CPAP to wearing a custom oral appliance now. And have enjoyed both. I was very adherent to my CPAP therapy. I'm extremely adherent to my custom oral appliance. But it is, I hate that there is this sort of world of, there's a divide of traditional sleep medicine, which is diagnostics, it's CPAP therapy, sleep labs and DMEs, and then sort of out here in the periphery is all of these dentists and sleep people who do sleep medicine related to these custom oral appliances, but there's not a good marriage where a patient truly gets the right option based on what potentially might be the best solution for that particular patient. There was a lot of hospital-based sleep labs. Do you have a dentist that's part of your sleep organization, sleep operation? Yeah, see, that's the world that we live in today, and part of it is a billing issue. It's not necessarily that payers won't cover custom oral appliance. One of the problems is that it's a DME code. So you have a solution for patients that a DME has to provide. A lot of DMEs don't necessarily have those codes built into their contract, so that's almost a non-starter in some ways. So it leaves the patient sort of hanging in the balance of ultimately having to pay for these devices and pay cash. Which at times, I felt terrible. I sent a friend of mine recently to a dentist who does dental sleep medicine, and he called me after he got out of his appointment, and he's like, "You didn't tell me it was going to be $6,000 for my custom oral appliance." And so he might not be my friend anymore. All right, a couple of other therapies that are out there. Excite OSA. Has anybody seen Excite OSA? Oh, wow. Yeah, so Excite OSA is a daytime therapy that will help to improve a nighttime clinical issue. It is a billable service for patients. I would tend to think that it's going to lend itself to patients who are more on the mild side of the sleep apnea spectrum. But again, these are all the tools and things that are out there that we should have in our arsenal to be able to help patients from an adherence and a therapy standpoint. Because if your patient is not adherent to CPAP today, what's the next step? Yeah, that really is sort of where we leave patients today, is that there's not a next step to, okay, you've tried, you did a great job trying CPAP, it's just not for you. But there are some alternative therapies that patients should be exposed to. This is actually a new therapy that will be available, I think, sometimes in the next year or two. It looks a little invasive in the picture that I have of it. There's not a lot of images. It'll be, I think when it finally gets to the marketplace, it'll be much smaller. It's actually an external pressure device that's able to sort of pull it's not enough suction that it's going to leave an impression or anything, for the patient, but it does have enough suction to it that it's able to help keep the airway open during the nighttime while the patient's sleeping. So does it work? I don't know. We have iNap. Has anyone seen this one? It was actually out years ago as another product, and I think that company went out of business, and it became iNap. iNap's been available now for a couple of years. I don't know that it's covered by insurance today, so it's probably a cash option for patients. This one actually is a little tube that's connected to a piece of silicone that actually is able to pull. It's a suction device that gently sort of pulls the tongue forward and helps to keep the airway open during the nighttime. I did get the opportunity to trial this device, and I've never slobbered so much on my pillow in my entire life. It's like the whole night I just felt like I had drool running out of my mouth. And that's not a typical problem for me. Zoma. Anyone heard of Zoma? So if you are in a sleep lab or in a sleep clinic where you have these different treatment options for patients, there's not been a lot of Philips at one point had a positional therapy device for patients that was available. Part of the recall was that they eliminated that product from their service. So really, from a positional therapy standpoint, Zoma is the sort of single, I would say, best option today. And they're working on a Zoma 2 product that's soon to launch, which is actually going to be connected to a patient app. So there is a billable code for it as it is today, but when the app comes around, then you'll have even another billable solution that will increase the reimbursement you can get for that device. Genio. So these are a couple of therapies that are not available yet, but they're coming. And I would say the one that is probably going to be the most impactful is this Genio technology. So this is an external hypoglossal nerve stimulator. External hypoglossal nerve stimulator. So where a patient has to go in for a fairly invasive procedure, and I think the highest that I have heard for Inspire was around $160,000 is what was billed to a patient's insurance. Has anyone heard anything higher than that? Okay. This is a 15-minute office procedure where they do an implant right under the patient's tongue. The patient will wear a patch with an activator as part of their nightly routine, and then they'll turn it on through an app, and it will pull the tongue forward. And does anyone, if you've not seen videos of what Inspire does, when you activate the Inspire instrument, it will pull the patient's tongue forward and to the side, and it's one side or the other, depending on which one sort of opens the airway the most. So that's exactly what you get with Genio. So think about the difference between an invasive procedure, which, by the way, some of those negative side effects, like patients will typically have if they turn their head, they have a line that runs from their hypoglossal nerve down to the activator. And, it's just, and sometimes you'll see in the patient Facebook group, they talk about that being tight, like they feel like they can't fully turn their head because of the implant. So this is 15-minute office procedure, so you have to think, I'm paying, my part of what I have to pay is an office procedure versus a surgical procedure at the hospital. Very different reimbursement, I would say very different expense to the patient than the current Inspire model. And I think what's interesting is that if you look at the company themselves, Nyxoah, ResMed is actually one of their investors. So at least ResMed thinks it's going to work. I think this is also another interesting therapy that's on the horizon. Has anyone seen or heard of cryotherapy? Usually that's related to weight loss and that sort of thing. So CryOSA, they're in some phase of clinical study, and it's kind of neat because they're phase 3 clinical trials called Arctic 3. I think the results have been good so far. So that's another therapy that's on the horizon that we're going to see. And by the way, with Nyxoah, they're not available yet in the U.S., but I have seen that they have started to hire salespeople and clinical specialists as part of their team. So it's coming fairly quickly.
That's secondary to Inspire?
No, it would be an alternative to Inspire.
Oh.
So where if a patient has a choice of Inspire or the Genio procedure, my guess is when they find out how much it costs, they'll probably choose Genio.
So is the Genio led by an ear, nose, and throat, or
Probably. I think that an ENT probably is the right surgeon for that procedure too, because it is an implant under the tongue. But it seems like that would be a lot better than the other. All right, so let's talk about some of the other things that are out there. And to me, I think Genio is a great solution for patients that are intolerant of CPAP. But there's been a lot of talk about GLP-1s and as it relates to sleep apnea treatment. So is everyone familiar GLP-1? In sort of the regular world, people know GLP-1s, typically they call them all Ozempic. But Ozempic, and by the way, none of those drugs today are approved for sleep apnea, none of them. However, Lilly has a product called Zepbound. Zepbound today is FDA approved for weight loss, but there is the expectation that by the end of this year, they'll have FDA approval for it to treat sleep apnea. That is correct.
So you get excited, they show these commercials and like,
yes.
Hey, you call your insurance and they're like, oh, that was $6,000, $3,000 a month.
Yep.
Whatever. So that's the main thing.
Yep.
A lot of these, and I don't mean to waste much of your
No,
time.
that's good.
But even like that Inspire, to me, it's so falsely, because I have so many of my patients coming to the sleep lab, I don't want this, I want an Inspire. It's like, you got to have it with this, because our ear, nose, and throat, I don't know what y'all experience, but they, you have to have a certain BMI.
Yes.
BMI
And you have to be intolerant of CPAP.
Yeah, and they get mad.
Yeah,
No,
yeah.
that's not what, no, I'm just saying, you know.
Yep.
So a lot of these commercials are, and I don't know if any of y'all, but I've had like 3 patients come back to do the, you know, you check their voltage and do, I've only had one do good, the rest of them, I just was horribly concerned because this patient and the lady training, she let him go. They were throwing out, I mean, their AHI was worse than somebody that, I was like, and then this is what
Yep.
they paid your insurance, he said his was $130,000, and they paid that, and you're not any better.
Well, I think the thing you have to remember is that our idea of effective treatment is 0 or something close to 0, right?
Oh, no, this guy's
Yeah.
probably AHI was 100 and something.
Well, and so that's one of the things you do have to take into account with some of these alternative therapies is that their measure of success is different than what we would, what we would expect. So Lilly, no, you're fine. Lilly funded one of the largest research studies that has been done related to pharmaceutical treatment and sleep apnea. It was called the SURMOUNT OSA study, and you should go look at it and read up on it because their measure of success and how their impression in the report of success would be different than what you as a clinician would probably say is a successfully treated patient from a sleep apnea perspective. Now, 2 things that are good is that, yes, there's about a 50% reduction in AHI when a patient uses a GLP-1 medication, but it takes a year before you see the end result of what the medication is doing because it takes time for that patient to lose enough weight for it to have that impact on their sleep apnea enough that it's real treatment to that patient. So in general, my expectation is that when it does come out and when we do see payers, and I think it's interesting because you're right, one of the absolute barriers today to all of the GLP-1s, and it's interesting, if you look at Lilly's website, they have Zepbound and they have, I can't remember the manufacturers, but there's Zepbound, Wegovy, there's Ozempic, and Mounjaro. They're all in the same sort of family, but each one of them, and essentially each manufacturer has 2 different medications that are the same thing, but one is FDA approved for weight loss and the other is FDA approved for diabetes. Most payers will cover the GLP-1 medication for diabetes, but they won't cover it for weight loss. But it's weight loss. Yeah, it's weight loss. So well, and I think payers are, like I'm going to a meeting next week with a group of payers, and this is something that we don't necessarily get to see from our clinical perspective at times, is that their spend on GLP-1 medications went from $2 million a couple of years ago to $10 million last year. So they are spending a ton of money on these medications. If you are going to pay for it out of pocket, it's typically about $1,000 if you're getting the name brand version of these drugs. And what's also kind of interesting too is that this has created sort of a subculture of new companies that are offering these compounded versions of these medications. Again, it's all cash in that particular industry. I know there's some groups out there, Fella Health, maybe HIMSS, and some of those so there's different groups that offer these. It's all telehealth, and they ship the medication to you, and you pay your $300 a month, and you're on a GLP-1. So there are some alternatives that are at least somewhat reasonably, priced from but you're getting a compounded medication, so it is a little bit different formulation than what you might get from, the manufacturer. And you also typically with those, I know that they will send syringes, so you're having to draw medication and give it to, it's self-administer, where these things are pretty simple. It's an injector. You just sort of hold it to your skin, and it will do the injection for you. So, yeah.
And it's about $200.
Oh, well, that's as good as I've heard.
It is sublingual? Oh, wow.
Yeah. So that space is getting, now the thing I think it's going to be impactful for us from a sleep industry perspective is if we thought that we saw advertising increase and awareness increase related to sleep apnea, wait till Lilly starts advertising. Because as big as Inspire is, Lilly essentially has unlimited resources when it comes to advertising in this space. And I want to give you a website to take a look at, because the difference between Inspire and Lilly is that Inspire wasn't necessarily, they allowed patients to fill out this form, and they've got 45,000 patients a month coming through their intake funnel. But Lilly has a website called Lilly Direct, so it's lilydirect.com. If you go to lilydirect.com today, you can click on diabetes, sleep apnea, and I think there's one other condition that you can get treated through that website. And they will connect you to a provider that is in their network that can help get you the medication that they manufacture. So they have the channel to get the patient from, I'm interested in your medication, to a provider who's going to help prescribe it for you. And if you look at the website, it's kind of interesting, and I'm not joking to you, that it's literally like there is a blank space that is waiting for sleep apnea to get added to it. So it's coming. Now, if you work in the DME industry, I think it's interesting that we see this, and at first, when GLP-1s, when the Surmount OSA study first came out, the results first came out, ResMed's stock it tanked, over the next few weeks, because I think there was this idea that there's not going to be the need for many CPAP machines, when patients can take the GLP-1. They have a new sort of message, and I agree with the latest form of their message, which is this is going to help all ships to rise. Lilly's going to advertise. Patients will probably still need to be on a CPAP machine, even taking the GLP-1, because remember, it only reduces AHI by 50%. So if your AHI is 40 and it reduces by 50%, you still have sleep apnea. So, and that's exactly right. I think that it's a co-therapy. So I see GLP-1s and CPAP therapy being used together in the future. Well, that's what we don't know too, is what the payer requirements are going to look like related to the GLP-1s. I do know that in North Carolina, it's where I'm from, North Carolina Medicaid is getting ready to cover GLP-1s for diabetes and also obesity. So a Medicaid plan is now going to start covering it. ApneMed, let's talk about that one. This is the big one. If you can say, is there a magic pill out there that will treat sleep apnea? Well, guess what? There's a magic pill out there that will treat sleep apnea. And we're going to see it in 2025. That is their current projected timeline. Again, it's a medication that's about a 50% reduction in AHI. But what's different about ApneMed's Synergy medication, and you can see these two different medications. Again, that's why I want you to take away from here, some of this information and do some research yourself. If you look at these two different medications, they've been on the market for forever for different purposes. The atomoxetine is an ADHD medication, and then the roxabutanine is I think it's used for urology. So they have found the right combination of those two medications, and it's able to sustain a patient's airway. And I got to hear it was a sort of a strange, I applied to be in ApneMed's phase 3 clinical trial because I wanted to try the medication and see if it worked. I didn't get in, but when they found out that I worked for a DME. But the person who was interviewing me was able to tell me some stories of patients who had historically been on CPAP, and there was one lady in particular, her and her husband went away. I think they came to Pigeon Forge for their anniversary, and it was the first time she was able to communicate after they got back that it was the first time in 20 years that her husband had that he didn't hear her snore when she wasn't on her CPAP machine. And so this medication there's no weight loss involved. It is, you take the medication and you get the results that night.
So again, what is the medication exactly? What is it supposed to do?
It will, that's exactly what it's going to do, is to dilate the posterior airway space to help keep the airway open enough to. Now, I think all of this, doesn't take into account that there can be different levels of where the obstruction takes place, but at least in the clinical trials for this particular group, they have found significant success with very little side effects, I might add, which is interesting. I actually thought that with the atomoxetine being an ADHD medication, that it might cause the patients not to be able to go to sleep, taking the medication, but they didn't find that to be the case at all. Is this interesting? Kind of neat. I told you there was more disruptors on the sleep therapy side than there is on the diagnostic side. So there's two other companies that are in different places from a clinical trial perspective, Respire RX and then also Inconnex. The only thing I'll tell you about both of these so far is that they've had similar results to ApneaMed, where there's a 50% reduction in AHI, but with both of these, what's also kind of interesting is that they're THC based. And if you do some research, there are some uses of THC as it relates to treating sleep apnea. So both of these companies, again, have different formulations of, along with some other components that help to keep the patient's airway open while they're sleeping. All right, the last couple things we'll talk about just briefly, and again, I won't spend a lot of time on this because Emerson's going to go do a deeper dive into phenotyping and endotyping. And this is, to me, this is that perfect world where we use technology to classify patients to, number one, get them through the proper diagnostic channel, and then also to get them to ultimately the type of therapy that's going to be most effective for that patient based on multiple layers of criteria and not just a single AHI to make the decision whether that patient is the go-to is CPAP. It's what we know today. But with all of these other things that are out there, and maybe even some of the things that are commercially available today that could be effective for a patient that just never get offered, the patient never gets those things offered to them, I think would become a part of this in the future. But so the two terms for you to take away from this last couple slides is just that phenotyping and endotyping will become a part of how we manage patient populations in the future. If I were going to ask you, I'll go back to inpatient sleep apnea screening. If I were going to ask you what's the one barrier to get your hospital, or that prevents your hospital from doing sleep apnea screening, what would it be? Physician capacity? Sleep lab capacity? I asked a physician who's a very well-respected physician recently about, he works in a very large multi-state healthcare system. I asked him the question, why do you guys not screen for sleep apnea in your program? You know how important it might be as a part of finding these patients and getting them diagnosed and treated. And he said, there's no way that we would be able to handle the number of patients that would come through, that need care. We have no capacity to take care of those patients. So we can't even start the program because we know we can't take care of all of them. So it's significant. Well, that too. There is that, because one of the things that it can be a challenge, like at WellStar, if you have not had an opportunity to look at WellStar or hear from their sleep navigators, they present it at conferences all over the place, and they screen their patients for all of their patients for sleep apnea, but they use the criteria on the stop bank 5 or more in order for them to do a sleep navigator visit to the patient room, because they don't have navigators to actually get to all the patients that would be identified if they use 3 or more. So they do 5 or more, and those sleep navigators produce a significant part of the volume of patients that goes through their sleep lab. So something for you to take away from here. It was my presentation last year, but I think it is. I don't want us to be afraid of these new technologies for diagnosis and new therapies, because there's so much opportunity for us to expand our reach as it relates to these patients. And then as we engage with patient population using AI and using this technology, because so phenotyping involves categorizing patients based on observable clinical characteristics and features. And then endotyping is a little different. It's the context of sleep apnea refers to identifying distinct underlying mechanisms that contribute to these diseases, unlike phenotyping. So again, Emerson will spend a little more time on these very specifically in his AI presentation a little bit later today. But ultimately what I want you to take away from this is that things are changing. And in some cases, it's just that the local coverage determination, payers are driving adoption of whether we're able to use some of these types of tools or whether we can't. Palmetto last year changed some of their policy as it relates to home sleep testing, and you can't use a PPG device on a Medicare patient if you're in the Palmetto coverage area. So some of the payers don't necessarily align with where the technology is today. But again, just do the research, do the education on all of these things so that you understand from a diagnosis standpoint how they work. And then from a therapy standpoint, try to bring in, let me leave that as a challenge for you for some of the hospital programs. If you don't have a dentist that's part of your program, I would suggest that you engage with a local dentist who does custom oral appliance therapy, because that's one more step that might help a patient that just can't tolerate CPAP. Because what we don't want to do is to have our field turn into, we've done all this work to diagnose a patient, and when a pill comes out, now we've just got a magic pill and everybody gets a pill instead of a CPAP machine. So we just want the right therapy for the right patient. And again, I just want everyone to know for sure there's lots of patients, and we're not going to run out of people to work on and to work with. And this is the future of where things are going, and I think the future is now. So thank you very much. Any questions? All right, I'll be around this afternoon if anyone has any questions for me. Thank you.